Do you like the look of sentiments as a background but don't want the hassle of having to line them up? Well, there's a new embossing folder in town and it does all the hard work for you. Hello there, Michelle Short here with Terrific Tags with Michelle. I'm here on the Altenew YouTube channel twice a month, so if you enjoy my videos I'd love for you to subscribe. So let's get started. The embossing folder that I'm talking about is the Mini Sentiments 3D embossing folder. This is quite tiny in size, but it's very mighty. You can see here that there are lots of different sentiments on this folder, and I'm already thinking before I kind of actually emboss anything is that I don't want all of the sentiments to be visible. So I've cut my tag from the Terrific Tags die set from Crafty Necessities Jet Black cardstock, and as I'm popping this inside of the folder I'm trying to figure out what sentiments are going to get covered up by my focal point. I don't really want the happy birthday and the happy anniversary to be that visible. I'm not too keen on the congratulations at the top, but the whole of the tag is going to kind of cover a lot of that. Like, you won't necessarily read it as one whole word. So I'm making sure that as I'm lining up this tag inside of the embossing folder, that my focal point is going to be in the right place to cover up those sentiments. The other ones are pretty generic, like you are awesome, you are beautiful, and that kind of thing I'm happy to have visible, but I don't really want happy anniversary and happy birthday to be on the same tag. I don't think it personally really makes that much sense, but everyone's different in what they would prefer. So I have run that through my die cutting machine, and you can see that because this is a 3D embossing folder, it's really well embossed, this tag, and you can see those sentiments really nicely. And that congratulations at the top, once I kind of add in all my focal points, most of that is going to get covered up. But I did want to show you that although I'm using this as a background today, you can use it as individual sentiments if you want to. You can cut them down into strips. So I've kind of had a little practice go here. You can see that it doesn't look very neat, but I've added some white pigment ink over the top of the sentiments, and it does really bring them out quite a lot. So that's definitely a good way to do it. I did a similar thing with white embossing powder. I dabbed on the embossing ink and then added the embossing powder on top, and I think that that also works quite well. And then I also thought that I would do it with white cardstock with black ink over the top. And again, it does look a little bit messy, but I was doing this quite quickly just to see what it would look like. Again, I'm not using it as an individual sentiment, I'm using it as a background today, but I wanted to show the versatility of it. If I was to do it that way, I would cut them into strips first and then add the ink on top, and I think that that would look a little bit neater. But for today's tag, I'm moving on to my focal point. I'm using the mixed foliage layering die set today, and I'm using one of the larger flowers from this set. This is a really pretty set with lots of different flowers in. So I'm using that larger one there at the top. Is just 2 layers, and then 2 layers for the flower center, and then I'm using this leaf kind of cluster here as well. So I've die cut those from Classic Crest 110 solar white cardstock, and now I can add some ink blending on top. I have popped them down onto my sticky mat, and I'm using a mini blending brush, and I'm starting off with some blues for the flower. So this is the Deep Blue Seas Fresh Dye ink collection, and I'm starting off with the lightest shade, and I'm going to focus the darker colour towards the centre of the flower. That makes sense to me in terms of where the shadows would fall, and then the tips of the petals will be a little bit lighter. So I'm going in with circular motions of this blending brush, and I do like to dab off some of the excess ink from my brush onto the mat here. I just find that I get a smoother blend that way. I don't want to have too much ink on that brush because I do, like I say, want the tips of those petals to be lighter. So I can now go in with the next colour, and again focusing that colour into the centre of those petals. For my tag today, I am inspired by the card that I made for the release. I use the same products that I'm using today, but I'm creating a tag to accompany the card. I quite like to do that if I want to send it as a gift or something like that. It's quite nice to have a coordinating tag. So I can finish off here with the darkest shade, and I am removing quite a lot of that ink from the brush because I don't want to have the flowers too dark, but I do still want that darkness in the center. And I really love how they turned out. I'm thinking that this flower is probably supposed to be a sunflower maybe, but I'm using it more like a daisy. For the flower centres, I'm using some yellow inks from the Golden Sunset Fresh Dye ink collection. I'm just using the two lightest here. And then for the foliage, I'm mixing it up a little bit. Usually I go for the Green Valley Fresh Dye ink collection, and I am still using one of those shades, but for the lighter shades, I'm using the Limeade and the Lime from the Whispering Woodland Fresh Dye ink collection. These are quite a lot brighter, hence the kind of limey look of them, and they go really nicely with the Green Valley ink that I'm going to add on the top. So I'm going in with that lightest shade first, just focusing again most of the colour towards the base of the leaves, and then I can go in with that lime, which is just a little bit darker. And then I can finish off with the grass field from the Green Valley Fresh Dye ink collection. And I really love how this ink works nicely with the other shades, so I'm definitely going to do this again. I really love how these turned out, and I thought the brighter colours would work quite nicely with the blues of the flower. So I'm going to set those aside to dry for a little bit, and I can adhere my other tag onto the back of my embossed tag. This is going to make sure that I've got a nice clean area on the back of the tag if I want to write a personal message. Sometimes, like I say, I do have the tag as a standalone tag. Sometimes I do end up putting it on a card, but it's nice to have the different options. You can see there that you've got all of that debossing on the back, which doesn't look bad at all, but I think it looks a little bit nicer having the clean tag on the back. So I just use some glue tape to adhere those two together back to back. I can now assemble the flower, and this is really easy because it's just 2 layers for the flower petals. So I'm adding some liquid glue around that keyhole there in the center, and all you need to do is make sure that you line up those keyholes one on top of each other. So these are really easy to line up. So again, for that flower center, I can just add some liquid glue onto the edges of that, and then I can pop that on top, lining up that keyhole in the center. And then I've got the top layer there, which again I can add some liquid glue onto. I'm just adding it around the outside since that kind of keyhole is in the center. And then I can line that up on top. And then I'm just going to manipulate the petals a little bit, try and sort of have them so they're kind of bending upwards a little bit to add a little bit of dimension onto the flower. Make sure that it's not completely flat. And I'm just doing that with my fingers here. I just found that quite easy to do. And then as you see, once I add the flower on top, because it is quite big, it is covering up those sentiments in the middle, which to me don't really necessarily make sense for this particular project. And also the sentiment that I'm going to add as my main sentiment. I can now start arranging and adhering all of these pieces together. So I've added some liquid glue onto the back of these leaf pieces here. One of them faces right and one of them faces left, so I'm just figuring out here what I think looks best for which part of this kind of back of the flower here that I'm popping them behind. So just figuring out which ones I like, which layout I like. Can add some more liquid glue onto the back of these, and I'm not adding glue all the way to the back because I know that they're going to overhang the edge of the tag there, so I don't want any glue showing on the back. I am just manipulating those stems there from the leaves just so that you can't see them so much through the flower petals. And then I wasn't sure whether to add the last leaf here or not. In the end, I do decide to. They're sort of at the top. Sometimes I like to cut extra just so that I've got a few different options. And I'm just going to place this a little bit higher so it does cut off that congratulations word a little bit, so you don't end up really seeing that one at all either. I can then add some instant dimension foam tape into the center of that flower. I am going to go back and add some behind the petals, but I'm going to do that a little bit later. So I can just adhere that down onto the tag. And I do want to press that flower center down quite well because I am going over that embossed area. I can then add some black twine through the top of the tag. So I folded that in half, popped that through the whole of the tag, and now I can secure that at the front and tie a bow. And then I'm just going to fiddle to get the bow exactly how I want it. So once I'm happy where the tails are, I can then make that a little bit smaller. And then once I'm happy with the size of that, I can bring in my scissors and cut those tails down. And again, that's going to cover up a little bit of that congratulations word as well. I have stamped and heat embossed a sentiment from the Sentiment Strips 2 stamp set. I thought that Just For You would work quite nicely with the rest of the sentiments that you can see in the background on the tag. So I'm adding some instant dimension foam tape onto the back of that, and I can adhere that down into the center of the flower. So I'm just going to place it down really lightly to start with, and then I can bring it in my T-square ruler to try and make sure that that's straight. So just being careful there with the elements overhanging that tag. And then I can straighten that up and press that down. And now I'm going to go in with small pieces of the instant dimension foam tape and pop those behind some of the petals. I don't need to do it for all of the petals. Some of them I was quite happy to have a little bit flatter onto the tag, and some of them I wanted to be more raised. And it's also going to give me a little bit extra stability to making sure that that flower is well adhered down onto the tag as well. So just cutting some small pieces down, removing the backings off of that foam tape, and then popping them behind the petals. And then to finish off and to add a little bit of sparkle onto the tag, I'm adding some clear iridescent stellar sequins. So I've just figured out the placement of where I want them to go, and then I can add some small dabs of glue and then pop them on top. And for some of them, I'm adding the glue just directly onto the back of the sequin. For these ones that I'm kind of popping underneath something, I thought that it was a little bit easier for me just to add the glue onto the back of the sequin rather than trying to get my glue underneath. And then I'm also using a combination of the tweezers and also the Perfect Picker. For the small ones, I really like to use the Perfect Picker. For some of the larger ones, I do prefer to use my tweezers. So I've added 3 down here, and I do often like to add embellishments behind elements. I feel that it kind of makes it look a little bit more like they were meant to be there rather than they're kind of just floating around. I hope that makes sense. So I can just finish off with this tiny little one here on top of that leaf. And so that's the tag finished for today. I really love how it turned out. You can see all of those lovely sentiments in the background, but they are still a background feature rather than the main focal point, which I really love. And this is the card that I made that I got my inspiration from. You can see obviously more of the sentiments in the background, but I did my flowers in a lavender colour. I think the blue pops a little bit more, so I'm really glad I used it for my tag today. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar on YouTube and also over on the Altenew blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Wait, we have more where that came from. If you're after fabulous card making tutorials, you are definitely in the right spot. Our amazing design team create and upload fabulous video tutorials right to this YouTube channel. If you don't want to miss another amazing crafting tutorial, don't forget to subscribe and click that fun red button that you can see. Let's become paper crafting experts together.